Hey everybody, it's me again, Mr. Wagstaff. Alright, so today what we're going to talk about is really cool. So we started talking about the Great Depression, how awful it was, and what we're going to start talking about today. Actually today it gets absolutely like breaking point of the worst stuff that happened politically, more so than anything else, because I think we've already really talked about it in detail how bad it was for the typical people during the Great Depression. Today we're going to start talking about Hoover and what happens in the 1932 election. Anyway, before I just give you the cliff notes, the story itself is super cool. So we're just going to get into it today. So what we had been talking about last week is Hoover had this idea that the economy is going to naturally recover. There's nothing he needs to do to fix it because it was great without his intervention. It collapsed without his intervention. So therefore, in his mind, it will naturally get better on its own without his intervention. It progressively gets worse while he is the president. For that reason, a lot of people start turning against Hoover and disliking him, calling shantytowns Hoovervilles and stuff like that. In the 1930 election, he's a Republican. Everybody that got elected in the 1930 midterm elections, halfway through his term in office, was a Democrat. That is a telltale sign for whoever's in charge that you got to do something different. So he tried to do some little stuff, and we talked about this on Friday, if you remember, or on Thursday, I believe. The Federal Home Loan Bank Act, Reconstruction Finance Corporation. He had done some stuff, put some people to work. It just wasn't enough, all right? He is not popular already, and he is now 1932. He is going to try to run for re-election in a time period when it is extremely unpopular to be Herbert Hoover, and it gets worse. So this is insane that this story happens. All right, 1932. You have a whole bunch of World War I veterans. So at this time, the World War I veterans are early 30s. They're probably my age or a little younger. All right, so they're not super old dudes, but they're, mid 30s. So they have a family and other stuff. It was kind of an odd situation. So what had happened is that, and I'm going to mess up this number. Well, gee whiz, but the story remains the same. So, what happens is the World War I soldiers are promised a bonus in 1945. All right, I believe the bonus is $2,000. I'm pretty confident that's the number. You can probably Google it real quick right now and prove how wrong I am. But I believe the bonus is $2,000 that these men are supposed to get in 1945. So they served in World War I, which is ended in 1918. So as a thank you for serving in World War I, they're going to get a bonus in 1945 of $2,000. Just something that had been on the books since the end of World War I. Well, these men are now saying, I may not live to 1945. It's 1932. I want my money now. So the problem is all the money that the government had already been spent on the Hoover Dam. So they don't have the money to give out to them. Being mean to your veterans is like the most politically suicide thing that you can do. If you're mean to veterans, you're never going to get reelected. So the situation at the federal level is they know they need to take care of their veterans, all right? Because if the veterans are mad at you, that's bad. However, the issue is they don't have the money to pay them. So if the veterans want their bonuses now, it's just not a possibility to pay them. You just can't do it because there's not enough money. Well, Congress kind of collectively agrees to not talk about it. We're just not going to talk about it because if you have to talk about it, you're going to have to tell the veterans you can't pay them because you don't have the money. That, again, extremely unpopular. So they're like, we're just going to not talk about it. There is this guy, all right, called Wright Patman. So Wright Patman decides to introduce a bill into Congress, and I got a feeling he got the hardcore stare down by everybody else in Congress, and it says, hey, here's what we can do. We're not going to give them the $2,000 now. You can have an option. If you are one of these soldiers, you can take your $2,000 in 1945, or instead of that, you can take $500 now, whichever one you want. Now, while that seems like a logical solution to this, they don't have enough money to pay them the $500. Like that, like there's no money. So even though on paper that, oh, that's a good idea, pay them less now and they can choose. The problem is there's no money to pay them that $500. So Wright Patman, a congressman, introduces this into Congress, and they give them the stare down because they're going to have to vote against it, and it's going to make them look really bad, but you can't give away money you don't have. So when this bill gets introduced, all the World War I soldiers love it. Like, they love this bill. Like, this is fantastic. So what they do is they want this bonus, right? This bonus that was promised to them. And they were in the Army in 1918, so they call themselves the Bonus Army, all right? They marched to Washington, D.C., hundreds of thousands of them, all right? Or about 100,000 of them. This is a picture on the front steps of Congress when this bill is going to get voted on. Tons of World War I soldiers from all over the country have marched here to support the vote for this bill, all right? Well, as we've already talked about, there's no money to pay them. So Congress reluctantly has to vote it down, and it's called the Patman Bill. So this picture here just shows you all the people that are on the steps. I got another picture here. The reason I do this is you can see it's like Pittsburgh, Alabama. This is like a uniting thing around the country of these World War I veterans who want to get paid. So they're all here, but it gets voted down. There's literally not enough money to pay them. So Wright Patman introduced it, all right, and it gets voted down. They're like, no. Now, they've got a whole bunch of dudes outside waiting to hear about this. So what happens is they send, meaning the rest of Congress, they send Wright Patman out to go talk to them and explain to them that the bill didn't pass because they're like, I'm not getting beat up. So Wright Patman goes out and he goes, shucks, guys, we shot our shot. We did what we could. It's not going to go through. Sorry, you guys just head on home. All right. So there's 100,000 World War I veterans here, all right, that were called the Bonus Army. 98,000 of them go, shucks. Well, see you later, and they leave. 2,000 of them, however, are like, nah, this is not a thing that's going to happen. Like, where am I going to go? What do you mean go home? I don't have a home. I'm completely broke. I want the money promised to me by the government. So you have about 2,000 of these guys left that are not going to return home, and they're going to make this the problem of Hoover. Everybody blames Hoover for everything, so they're going to purposely make this Hoover's issue. So the 2,000 guys that left, they go and set up a Hooverville. This is an actual photograph of it. This is on the front lawn of the White House. They walk down the street to the White House, and they set up a Hooverville on the front lawn of the White House. They expect Hoover every single day. He's going to look out his window, and he's going to see the Hooverville that they claim he created. All right? This is an aggressive move right here. Again, this is the White House that you have set up a Hooverville on the front lawn of the White House to basically, I guess, guilt Hoover into giving you this money. All right. So think about this for a second. If you're Hoover at the time, what are your options here? All right. Now, a lot of times when I do this class activity, a lot of people will be like, well, just give them the money. But you can't do that. There's not money. Just give the money to the people that are on the front lawn. Yeah, if you gave the people that are on the front lawn the money that they need, then all you're going to do is constantly have this issue. All right. There's a lot of ways that you could do this. All right. And there's not a lot of good solutions, even though if you're a federal politician, hopefully you come up with a better solution than they come up with. Now, what do you think the worst possible solution to this would be? All right, and usually we do this at class discussion and figure out like the dumbest possible, and usually people don't even come up with the dumbest possible thing that you could do. What if you just sent in the army and shot them all? This is pretty much what Hoover's getting ready to do. It is absolutely insane, his decision here. All right, so this is an overreaction. What he's going to do, all right, this is a photograph, and this is at the time, I don't know how famous this photograph was at the time, but it becomes very famous in history. So Hoover looks out his lawn and feels like this is like an aggressive invading force, even though they're American veterans. So he calls in the military to get them off his lawn. All right. the two guys that are in charge, and these just happen to be the local guys there, but they both become incredibly famous in American history in World War II. Again, World War II is still over a decade away for us, or about a decade away for us before we get started. The two guys that happen to be here that are in charge of this is this guy right here named Douglas MacArthur. All right, he ends up becoming a household name in World War II. He's an unlikable person, but he is a fantastic general. And he's not a general at the time, but this is Douglas MacArthur. And then his second in command, this guy right here smoking a cigar, is Dwight Eisenhower, who will also be a 5-star general in World War II and will eventually become the president of the United States. These are the two guys that get sent in to deal with this. Now, they are going to be extremely heavy-handed here dealing with these guys on the front lawn of the White House. But when this goes really bad, you know who gets blamed? Is Hoover. Surprisingly, MacArthur and Eisenhower do not get any blame for this, even though Hoover tells MacArthur, all right? So Eisenhower works for MacArthur, so Eisenhower isn't really making decisions here. Hoover tells MacArthur, do whatever you have to get these guys off my lawn. Now, MacArthur, this is a guy that is known to overact, like use excessive force in the realm of what he's allowed to do. Nothing illegal, but if you give him this amount of force, he's going to go right to the edge every single time. So Hoover tells him to do whatever you need to get these guys off my lawn. So this dude gets all his soldiers lined up shoulder to shoulder, all right? And the first thing they do is they launch tear gas into this Hooverville. Now, I want to explain something to you. This is not just 35-year-old men like me, all right? This is their families, wife and kids and small children, all right? And they just tear gas them with no warning. So they launch tear gas into them, and then they march through shoulder to shoulder, bayoneting anybody. That's right, bayoneting anybody who refuses to leave. Multiple people die. Let's see, 2 people got shot, multiple people died, and there is an 8-month-old baby that dies of being tear gassed to death. They kill a baby. Think about that. They kill a baby. Absolutely insane. So once they force all the people off the front lawn of the White House, they're not just happy just getting them into the street. They are going to force them to run down the street. Like literally they make them run out of Washington, D.C., being chased by tanks. Tanks. Again, World War I homeless veterans being chased by tanks down the city streets of Washington, D.C. Once they chase them, 100% the people that have survived, which is the vast majority of them, but there are a couple people that died, they get them out of Washington, D.C., they come back to where the Hooverville is, where all these people's possessions are still at. Like, they didn't get a chance to pack up, so these people don't have anything. This is all their possessions. So what do they do here? Instead of making them take it all down, making them come back and get their stuff, they set it on fire. They purposely just burn it all down. You can see the Capitol building here in the background. They burn all their possessions they have left as a statement. Don't come mess with the United States government. Now, this is probably the worst possible way of dealing with this politically, because it's 1932. It's an election year. Herbert Hoover, already crazy unpopular, just called in the military on our veterans, killed a baby, and then set everybody's possessions on fire. The poorest people left in the country set their possessions on fire, and then advertised it in the papers with pictures like this. You think Hoover's going to win re-election? There's a 0% chance that's going to happen. All right, so the crazy thing is this happened in an election year. This is a picture of kids. Hard times are still hoovering over us. Like, when children hate you, you're probably not going to win re-election. All right, and I like to do the Hoover's Poor Farm Tobacco Fund. because the kids need a tobacco fund, I guess. It's the 30s, a different time period. So what is interesting here, and I got a little video clip to show you on the bonus army. Actually, let me show you the video clip, and then we'll talk about it.
Optimistic and cautious approach then became outraged by his treatment of a group of World War I veterans in 1932. After the war, Congress issued veterans bonus certificates for their military service worth nearly $1,000 to be redeemed in 1945. Dismayed by the economic outlook of the time, the veterans demanded the immediate payment of their bonuses in full. In an attempt to satisfy their demand, Texas Congressman Wright Patman proposed a bill in which the government would immediately give veterans $500 in cash instead. To show their support of Patman's plan, between 10 and 20,000 veterans and their families peacefully marched to Washington, D.C. This so-called bonus army established a shanty town inside of the Capitol building. Hoover provided food and supplies for them, but when Congress vetoed the bill on June 17th, he asked the bonus army to leave. Most left, but approximately 2,000 stayed behind, hoping to meet with Hoover. Fearing a riot, Hoover ordered General Douglas MacArthur and the 12th Infantry Force to remove the veterans. Shocked Americans saw troops use bayonets and tear gas to force the vets to leave. In the melee, more than 1,000 people were gassed, an 8-year-old boy blinded, and an 11-month-old baby was killed. The shantytown burned to the ground. Public support for Hoover foundered.
Yeah, I would say public support would founder after you kill babies. So I know my notes say 8-month-old, that says 11-month-old. I don't know, again, where the discrepancy of that is. You know, where's the term bootleggers come from? Where does the term flapper come from? That, okay. How do you not know how many months old, like, collectively, a child that is killed is? But regardless, it's a baby. All right. So this brings us, there's a huge change in American history at this point in the 1932 election. So typically, whenever there's a presidential election, everybody wants to be the president. Like, look at how many people were running for the Democratic nominee. In 2016, it was like an open election. So, like, Republicans and Democrats, there was like a gazillion people wanting to run for president. People love running for president when everything's going good. When everything is in the largest financial crisis known to man, nobody really wanted to step forward. There's not nearly as many people stepping forward that want to be president when they know they're taking over one of the largest global financial crises in the history of the world. So Hoover clearly is not going to win. You could put a trained chimp to run against him, and he's going to lose. So nobody's going to vote for Hoover. The guy that's going to run against him is a guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. All right, FDR. FDR is a Democrat. He's a Democrat from the North, so he's kind of both sides. But even though he has this makeup that allows him to be electable, he was going to win anyway. If you got the nomination of the Democrats, you were going to win because nobody was going to vote for Hoover. So FDR, he becomes the president in 1932 in a landslide. And the main reason he's going to win is because he's not Hoover. All right. He promises to come in and work. He promises to come in and do stuff. And he says it is absolutely the government's responsibility to come take care of some of this stuff. So FDR is going to come in and be the president. He is probably one of our most famous presidents that we've ever had. He's up there with the Lincolns and the Washingtons as being the most famous president because he is going to come in during the Great Depression. He is also going to be the president during World War II. He is also the only president that we've ever had that serves more than 2 terms. He's actually going to be elected 4 consecutive times. He is elected 4 consecutive times. He ends up dying of natural causes in his 4th term. And then, so that wasn't, it was only prior to FDR serving 4 consecutive terms. The only reason people serve 2 terms is because that's what George Washington had done. And out of respect for George Washington, nobody served more than 2 terms. FDR comes in. he is going to serve 2 terms in the Great Depression, sees that World War II is getting ready to happen. He's very popular from what he's going to do in the Great Depression, and he becomes the president again for his 3rd term, is elected again at the end of World War II, and then dies. Nobody had a problem with this. Everybody loved FDR. However, it was really hard for the United States to transition to a new president after FDR because everybody was just so used to having FDR that people realized if you got the wrong guy in office, it could turn bad. So that's when they changed the Constitution and they say a president can only serve 2 terms. So the reason that is the rule today is not that anything wrong had happened, but after FDR had served 4 terms, they realized that could set a dangerous precedent. So they just made it a law that the way it had always been done, let's just do that. So FDR is the only one that's going to have served more than 2 terms. So we're going to talk about him quite a bit. Couple interesting things about FDR here. If you notice, this is actually an extremely rare picture, and this is crazy. So FDR is confined to a wheelchair. All right, so FDR can't walk. What's interesting about that? So he didn't grow up that way. He got polio, which is something that we have a vaccine for now, and it's been eradicated from society. I think there may be some 3rd world countries where it may still be an issue, but I think pretty much we have eradicated polio from society. He got polio as an adult, almost died from it, and lost the use of his legs. So he was already a politician before he had polio. So we needed to elect a leader that was going to fix things, a strong leader in 1932. All these countries did. The rest of the world is completely collapsed. Every country needs a strong leader that's going to show up that promises to fix everything. We're going to get FDR because that's what he's going to promise to do. Italy's going to get Mussolini. Germany's going to get Hitler. Russia's going to get Stalin. We get FDR. It sounds crazy to put him in the same category as that, but Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler, they view FDR as an equal. Like FDR, the reason he is our president and not we don't get a Hitler is in large part because Hitler wasn't in the United States. It'd be terrifying to think about what would have happened had Hitler been here. The main fundamental difference between FDR and those psychopaths, other than the fact that he's not a disgusting mass murderer, is he gets all the power to fix everything, right? People love power. He gets all of it. He's probably the most collectively powerful president we've ever had. Generally speaking, after he fixes all the stuff that he says he's going to fix, he gives that power back to Congress. Now, while FDR is treated very well throughout history, I don't want him to make him look like some white knight because he absolutely did some shady stuff. But generally speaking, the pros vastly outweighed the cons. All right. So, I want to talk more about him being in a wheelchair here. So, FDR, when we elected him, everybody wanted a really, really strong leader. The vast majority of Americans had no idea he was in a wheelchair. They just didn't know. And you're like, what do you mean they didn't know? Right here's a picture. So, FDR never asked anybody not to show him in a wheelchair. However, the American public needed a strong leader and just blatantly refused to acknowledge that FDR can't walk. They just refuse to acknowledge it. Like it's not against logic. Like the coronavirus, it's a respiratory disease, but you can't stop people from buying toilet paper. Like that, it's not logic, but it's just what people believe for whatever reason. So, FDR is in a wheelchair, and the media chooses by their own choice to never show him in the wheelchair. Most Americans feel like he's a completely able-bodied person. Here's how they get away with this. So he would have these metal braces on his legs. So he could stand up. He just couldn't walk. He could feel his legs. He wasn't paralyzed. He just didn't have use of them. And it was very painful to move his legs. So what would happen is when he would give a speech, they would wheel him in, like in front of a huge crowd. Like it's not like they were trying to hide anything. They'd wheel him in up to the podium. He would stand up at the podium. He'd snap these metal braces on his legs in place. They'd pull the wheelchair away, and that's when they would start videoing him and taking pictures of him as he gave his speech. So whenever you saw him speak, he's always standing up. Nobody thought anything of it. He had a special car made with the gas and brake on the steering wheel. So there's tons of videos of him driving around looking like a normal person because he had a specially designed car that showed him able to drive. What else? So he also, like, in the Oval Office, he had a special wheelchair made where the back of it looks like an office chair, so that when people came in to talk to him, they didn't realize that he was sitting in a wheelchair behind his desk. He doesn't ask to do this. This is kind of a thing the media has decided not to show, and they kind of did it on their own accord. And I'll give you the closest example, and they still did it. So Barack Obama, did you know he smoked cigarettes? Probably didn't, because the media generally, you can go Google tons of pictures of Obama smoking. He smoked cigarettes. He always talked about him trying to quit, and when he was president, knew it was a bad example, but the media generally just didn't want to show him smoking cigarettes. I don't know if it was so much because they liked Barack Obama, because if you look at the media, nobody likes whoever the current president is. It's just it's the worst job in the world in present day. But it may have just been because smoking is so unpopular in America now. They may have done that. But it's kind of similar, where you may never have known that Barack Obama smoked cigarettes, but it's the same way that FDR, people didn't realize that he was in a wheelchair, and it was a choice by the media to do that. The reason that's important is it really shows the mentality of America that we need somebody, a strong leader, to come in and fix it, and we don't want to see a sign of weakness. And people view being in a wheelchair as a sign of weakness. So they chose not to do that. So when FDR comes in, people are super hyped that this dude is going to fix things. All right. He's going to have this concept called the New Deal that we're going to start talking about tomorrow, because it's really big. It's his way of trying to fix the economy. All right. So he was president in 1932 election, ran against President Hoover. He's a reform-minded governor. His goal is to come in and change things. Now, I got a video clip here, and I'm hoping that they mention it. It's been a while since I've looked at it, of his inaugural address. He gives a very, very famous speech in which he says, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." I don't know if you've ever heard that quote before, but it's from FDR's inaugural address. And it's as pertinent then as it is today. He says the reason we're in this Great Depression, and I say today as in literally today, like with the coronavirus thing. He's like, we're in this Great Depression. It's awful. The biggest thing that we have to be afraid of is fear. We have to be afraid of fear, because what happens is when you're afraid, it paralyzes you and you don't change anything and you don't fix anything. He's like, we have got to just not be afraid. Just look at the situation, acknowledge the situation, and do it. Panic and fear is not helpful in any way, shape, or form. All right. And he does a very good job, if nothing else, of calming tensions down in America so that we can start recovering. And he starts it from his inaugural address, and his famous speech, in which we have nothing to fear but fear itself, mentions that. Just like today with the coronavirus. The worst thing that can happen is everybody panic and, oh, we're all going to die. Like you're not. We have a process in place. There's no reason to stress or panic over it. Just methodically go through, be quarantined, everything's going to be fine, and we're all going to go back to our normal life. This is on a much broader scale, because again, the Great Depression's lasted a decade. He's like, the worst thing you can do is panic. The worst thing that you can do is just freak out and run around. That's not helpful to anybody. It's a huge waste of energy. So this is one of the first things that he talked about. So I have a video clip here of his of FDR. Let me see. Give me 1 second. Let me see. All right, here we go. I got it here.
Roosevelt won a landslide election to become the 32nd president. FDR, the two-term governor of New York, brought a feeling of energy and optimism to the Oval Office.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
FDR's campaign song, "Happy Days Are Here Again," was symbolic of his positive, take-charge approach as president. And with a Democratic majority in both houses of Congress, he was able to make swift reforms that became known as the New Deal.
All right. So that's as far as we're going to get today. Tomorrow we're going to start talking about the New Deal, which is basically FDR's way of fixing the Great Depression. And we're going to pick up from there tomorrow. All right, guys. See you tomorrow.